braved the snow. It was pretty snow, right? So I'm assuming, sometimes I have a clicker, but I'm assuming y'all are good on the clicker back there. So it's okay. It's not too challenging today. Yeah, it's a simple one. So I have two cats, and there's a slide there coming up with the cats on them. Eddie and Sparky, we got them in 2014 because our other cat died, and my two children absolutely each one had to have a cat. And their names are Eddie and Sparky because the children named the cats, right? And the orange one is a heat seeker, a light and heat seeker. That's Sparky, which is kind of funny now that I think about Sparky like a light, and Sparky seeks out heat. I have a little light screen that I use sometimes, like in the mornings when it's dark and I'm not going to be out, and Sparky will come and try to lay on it. It emits no heat. It's just light, but for Sparky, it's, it should emit heat. And you see him curled up in I don't know if you can see it, curled up in the radiator there, like it's just what he does. So yesterday I was in my little office and with my, praying and reading, and I have a couple little plants there, and it looks out into our front yard, and I decided to light a candle. I thought, it's dark and cold, right? Not that cold, but so I lit this little candle, and sure enough, Sparky comes in. He jumps up onto my little desk, and he's putting his nose closer and closer to the candle because he thinks it's heat, right? He thinks this is a good thing. And suddenly he jumps away and gives me this look like, why didn't you tell me? Anyway, he was seeking heat and seeking light. And I didn't look back, but I feel like the last time I spoke in the winter, I talked about light. It seems to be an obsession of mine, but it's also in the Bible. It's also there. And we're going to go on a little bit of a journey here. This is probably the nerdiest sermon that I have ever given. We're going to go back before time because that's where our scripture starts. But then I've been spending some time in medieval writings. Like I'm from a tradition, and you are too, where we tend to look at people in the very early church, and then people after the Reformation or after our denominations were started, and everything else is kind of weird, and we kind of ignore it. But I'm finding there are people who loved Jesus, so we'll go into medieval times. No jousting, and then jump a little bit into a fantasy novel. So we will land back here in Indiana, and I think it'll be good. So that's where we're heading. Light in Advent. We've been meditating on light. My church has. You probably were through the Advent season. We light candles. As the days get darker, we complain about daylight savings time, right? And we kind of grumble when the alarm rings and now it's dark and we're having dinner and now it's dark, and then it gets cold. We do miss the light and warmth of summer, and we begin to long for it. We sing about light and life to all he brings, risen with healing in his wings. O come, thou day spring, come and cheer our spirits by thine advent here. Disperse the gloomy clouds of night, and death's dark shadows put to flight. Some years we light candles and sing "O Holy Night" together, right? The sanctuary is dark in some churches, and we light those candles and hope that the wax doesn't run down our hands. And we sing "Silent Night, Holy Night, Son of God, love's true light, radiant beams from thy holy face with the dawn of redeeming grace, Jesus, Lord, at thy birth." In our passage today, John writes about Jesus coming, but in a way that's vastly different from those passages we often read throughout the month of December. There are no shepherds, there are no angels. It's kind of cosmic. So if you've got a Bible, you can turn to John 1, but it's up here on the screen too. Hard to read. Should have chosen a different PowerPoint, but that's all right. So, sorry. I have a glasses problem. And I had a shampoo problem this morning. I have a red eye. I don't have pink eye, don't worry. Okay, John 1:1. Listen for the light in this passage. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. Notice that first verse, we are before Genesis. We were way back before time. And then we're in time. We're in the Genesis account. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. There was a man sent from God, whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. Notice light and life here. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness did not overcome it. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. The passage is saturated in light, like that hymn, light and life to all he brings, which is Hark the Herald Angel sings. It's funny, like light and life to all he brings, that verse has been coming to my mind all through the month of January. I haven't let the Christmas songs go, and my tree is also still up till the end of January always. So a very long time ago, and this is where we go into the Middle Ages and maybe even a little bit before, beginning in the 500s and 600s, Christians first worshipped in the 7 days leading up to Christmas with sayings that were sung or chanted all together. They were, at first it was in Latin, they were translated, they were sung all over the place. They were called the O antiphons, and these were new to me this Christmas during Advent. And they are phrases they're short, they're like two lines, but it's basically something that contains like, oh Jesus, and then come and do what we need. So things like, O leader of the house of Israel, O root of Jesse, O key of David, O radiant dawn, O king of all nations, O Emmanuel. And they say things like, O root of Jesse, sign of God, love for all his people, come save us. It's crying out for help. O key of David, opening the gates of God's eternal kingdom, come and free the prisoners of darkness. These may remind you of a Christmas song, do they? You got it. O come, Emmanuel. That hymn is based on these. There are 7 verses in O come, Emmanuel. And it's funny, O come, Emmanuel has always struck me as kind of a melancholy Christmas song, because it's written for this between time, when you're waiting, when you're hoping, when the light hasn't come yet, and it's based on over 1,000-year-old verses, poems that were sung and sung by millions of people over time. Like, think about it, in all kinds of languages. We are going to settle into the one this morning that was sung on December 21st. December 21st, they would chant or sing all together at Vespers, like the time of the day in the evening, so it's already dark. And especially it's already dark, like if you're in England in a dark, cold church on December 21st, and you would sing or chant, O radiant dawn, splendor of eternal light, sun of justice, come shine on those who dwell in darkness, in the shadow of death. Part of what's gotten me on my obsession with the Middle Ages is this woman named Grace Harmon. She has a podcast, and she had like an Advent devotional, and she said this about these verses. She said, when winter is at its deepest, but the year's turning point has come, they sing of Jesus as the dawn, the returning sun appearing in the time of greatest darkness, the depth of midwinter. So I think of people gathered over 1,000 years ago, and she was talking about people in England, which I don't think was called England then, right? But anyway, in that space of land, darkness in the northern hemisphere up there, well, where we are too, right? It's cold. We've got furnaces, we've got lights. I had friends whose furnace went out, but then we have friends with furnaces. If you're a medieval times person, your heat and your light and your comfort is fire or other people, right? Like maybe like my cats where they're huddled up together. Or my cat maybe not so foolish looking for that flame, but you would feel it down to your bones, right? Wintertime. Like sometimes I feel like we feel it down to our bones, but without those things, right? You would feel it in your bones. And so as I think about someone coming, the lights are going out. That's kind of nice. They would feel these words, right? It wouldn't just be a spiritual truth, like, you know, O radiant dawn, splendor of light. Like, that's a good thing that Jesus is light, right? I'm sure I can think like that sometimes. Like, that's a sweet thing, and I can teach it to the kids, this little light of mine. But if you're cold, and it's going to be several months until winter, until spring, you feel this, and as you pray this, it goes deep. It's not just an intellectual exercise. And I think there's something about, I'm dwelling on this now and not on December 21st, because here in Indiana, I feel like December 21st is the solstice, right? But it is not the deepest, darkest day of winter. Like it is, like it's the day with the least light, but I never feel like, oh, the 22nd, I am over the hump. Now spring is coming, right? Like, no. Our deep and dark is, well, it was a couple weeks ago, right, when it was so very, very cold, and the cold separated us from our vocations and from each other and for our work and from even wanting to live in the world, right? Like, now is the deep and dark where we feel it and where I need my light box to stay cheerful. Like, now is the time. Over 1,000 years ago, there was an old English poet who took the O antiphons and he expanded them. They're in this book that was written like in 10,000 AD, so maybe he wrote them in 800, we don't know. And here's a section. The section is really long, but I'm going to read it. It's the one that starts with, it's the next one, I think. Go ahead. There you go. If you don't, yeah. As I read this, think about December 21st, or a couple weeks ago here, super cold, a little bit grumpy. Maybe you had to go outside for something. You are feeling the cold in your bones, and you know that spring is probably not starting on February 2nd, right? The groundhog is probably going back. So listen and just consider that Jesus is light here. O Arundel, and this was originally in Old English, but then this is translated. O Arundel, brightest of angels, sent to mankind across the earth, and righteous radiance of the sun, splendid above all stars, by your own self you ever enlighten every age. As you, God born of God long ago, he goes into John 1, Son of the true Father, eternally existed, without beginning in the glory of heaven, so your own creation cries with confidence to you now for their need, that you send that bright sun to us, and come yourself to lighten those who long have lived surrounded by shadows and in darkness here in everlasting night. I'm going to read that last part again. That you send that bright sun to us and come yourself to lighten those who long have lived surrounded by shadows and in darkness here an everlasting night. This is partly where I'm like, okay, I don't want to forget the people who lived during that 1,000 years that I sometimes forget about, because this person loved Jesus and knew him as light and life and went deep into Scripture. Some of you might notice a word at the beginning there, Arundel. You recognize it? What? Oh, Frozen. Yeah. There's another one too. No, yeah. Yeah, there's another one too. I'll tell you about it in a minute here. It was this rare word in Old English. It might have been like it's kind of even a Germanic word. It might have way early on been a mythological figure. I told you I was geeking out here. Or personification of the sun or the dawn. And then the Anglo-Saxons, like in the 700s, 800s, adopted it into their Anglo-Saxon Christian writing. And here it is all about Jesus. Arundel is Jesus, the radiance of the Father sent to bring light and comfort. When J.R. Tolkien, who wrote The Lord of the Rings, Two Towers, Return of the King, everything, movies, how many of you have seen the movies? A few? Not yet? Yeah. They're fun. They're really, really, really long, and they're fun. It's a fantasy world, very Middle Ages. Anyway, J.R. Tolkien is like 15 years old. He's at Oxford. He is reading old English poetry because that's what he did, because he was J.R. Tolkien and he was 15. So he read this poem in Old English, and its first lines had a remarkable effect on him. He wrote later, he said, "I felt a curious thrill, as if something had stirred in me, half awakened by sleep." We get sleepy in the winter, don't we? "There was something very remote and strange and beautiful behind those words, if I could grasp it, far beyond ancient English." So Tolkien took Arundel into his imagination, and it was kind of the beginning of this whole world that he built and that he wrote about and that we have movies about now. And it comes up in this book, which I told my daughter that I was mentioning this scene, and she was like, I said it was in the Two Towers, and she said, "Oh, no, it's not. It's in Return of the King," because in the film it's in Return of the King, and my family know way more about all of these things than I do. But I'm going to read you a little bit of a story. So there are these two hobbits, Sam and Frodo, and they have this ring that they need to destroy. They're going on this really long journey. By now they're by themselves. You ready for the story? Do you know the story? Do you know the hobbits? No? So they are being led by Smeagol, who is very untrustworthy, and they go into this dark, dark place. This is the chapter called Shelob's Lair. Shelob is a great big scary spider. And says, "Here the air was still, stagnant, heavy, and sound fell dead. They walked, as it were, in a black vapor wrought of veritable darkness itself, as it was breathed, brought blindness not only to the eyes, but to the mind, so that even the memory of colors and of forms and of any light faded out of thought. Night always had been, and always would be, and night was all." Winter can feel like that sometimes, can't it? They walked for hours, and then they had not gone more than a few yards when from behind them came a sound, startling and horrible in the heavy padded silence, a gurgling, bubbling noise and a long, venomous hiss. "It's a trap," said Sam. So this very scary thing is happening in the dark. They are enveloped in darkness. Sam feels a blackness of despair and anger in his heart. It seemed to him, but at that moment, it seemed to him that he saw a light in his mind, almost unbearably bright at first. And he remembers that that Lady Galadriel had given Frodo a light. And he says, "The lady's gift." The star glass, a light to you in dark places. The star glass, and Frodo remembers, and here's where you can listen. Well, you have been listening, sorry. Slowly his hand went to his bosom. This is Frodo. And slowly he held aloft the phial of Galadriel. For a moment it glimmered, faint as a rising star struggling in heavy earthenward mists, and then hope grew in Frodo's mind, and it began to burn and kindled to a silver flame, a minute heart of dazzling light, as though Arundel himself had come down from the high sunset paths with the last, and then all this mythology. And he shouts, Arundel. And the story goes on. It's a really scary chapter, and more happens with the spider. But I think it's a beautiful thing that Tolkien's mind and heart would be captured with this vision of Jesus, the radiant dawn, and that he would use it to build a beautiful, beautiful story that people still read and people still watch. I like the part where it said, hope grew in Frodo's mind, because the light is not only the light far off, the light Jesus, the radiant sun, but the light is in us, right? And that's why we sing this little light of mine, right? Because it is in us. So it's not Advent, we're way beyond Christmas. But like I said, I think we feel the dark, and I think we feel the dark in our world, and these intractable dark things that happen that we feel that we have no control over, Sometimes I think this season makes things harder. It might be harder to find joy, and it might be easier to be grumpy, right? And some things are just harder, right? Some things are harder in the winter. We experience it in what we see in our world. We experience it inside too. I have my own personal things where it feels like it is deep and dark and intractable, whether it's relationships or family members or people I love, where the issues and the problems and the darkness they confuse me. They make me feel that maybe there isn't any hope. And then sometimes we get cold, right? Like we're all stuffed up when we don't feel good. I feel it. It's not quite like a middle person in the Middle Ages cold with that bone deep cold, but I think we feel it in a different way. I think if we stop to consider the darkness, it can feel bone deep, right? If we have the courage to look at the places that are dark. Sometimes it's easier just to do other things, and sometimes it's healthy to do other things. We don't stay in the dark all the time. But what would it be like if we meditated on, if we came back to Jesus as our dayspring, as our radiant dawn, so that feeling that we have of darkness, of cold, of, oh my goodness, I don't know what to do with this, if we turn and let hope rise in our hearts, to know that Jesus is dayspring, he is light. Sometimes the first step is just acknowledging it, right? Like just being like facing the dark, like, okay, here it is. Because sometimes I know for me it is easier just to be busy with other things. But even just to acknowledge it, let him shine out a little bit. But then for me it's that little turning of, okay, can hope flame in my heart like Frodo's heart? That light actually dispels the darkness. What would it look like to have a daily hope for his light, to have eyes and hearts that long for the light of his dawning, as if we had no furnaces and light bulbs, like we were desperate for the light and heat, for the comfort and the power and the relief that light gives? I'm going to finish with a verse from O Come, Come Emmanuel, and may that be our prayer this morning as we let light into the darkness. O come, thou dayspring, come and cheer our spirits by thine advent here, and drive away the shades of night, and pierce the clouds, and bring us light. Father, we see darkness, we live in darkness. We know that in Jesus there is light and life to all you bring. We carry that light, we seek that light, and we are so happy that we do not live in darkness. May we live as people who walk in the light. Amen.